Hi, I'm Charlotte Curtis, Head of Adult Services with the Livingston Parish Library, and we're here today talking about books in the beautiful Denham Springs Walker branch of the Livingston Parish Library. I'm here today with someone that I bet looks pretty familiar to a lot of you. Maybe you've taken one of his classes at Southeastern. Maybe you've been in a leadership class here in Livingston Parish, but at any rate, I've brought someone today that's going to talk to you about books and the influence they've had on his life. But we're really excited because today we're going to get to talk with someone who's actually authored books, and he's got some of the books that he's written as well as a book that his wife has written. And so in addition to talking about books that influenced him, he's going to get to tell us about books that he has himself authored. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? This is, by the way, I introduced myself and I forgot to introduce our guest, Dr. Sam Hyde from Southeastern University. And tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do when we're not having this excited COVID.
Yeah, with our long hair and everything, right? Hey, well, good morning, everyone. It's nice to be here. And what's really interesting, Charlotte, is this is my branch library. This is where we come to get our books and everything, and my children have membership cards here and everything and use it. So we're on home turf here now. I am Sam Hyde. I'm a professor of history and the director of the Center for Southeast Louisiana Studies at Southeastern Louisiana University in Hammond. And as a little boy, I grew up in the Florida parishes of Louisiana, where we are right now, in Amite, which many of you may have heard, in neighboring Tangipahoa Parish. And I used to go to the old library there, which wasn't nearly as nice as this one we're in today and everything, and would sit there and read books. I'm one of those people that always had questions revolving in my mind and everything. And when I first started picking up books and looking through them, it aggravated the problem. The more books I read, the more questions I had. And as I started getting a little older, even getting into junior high school and high school, I started finding out that our region right here has an incredible pattern of development. In fact, arguably the most interesting and peculiar pattern of development anywhere in the United States. Now, I could go on for 5.5 hours, my children say I bore people for a living, explaining all the reasons why we're so unique, but suffice it to say, the reason we haven't heard those stories as much is because used to, when people thought about Louisiana, they would think about New Orleans and Cajuns, and so they overlooked the original Lone Star Republic. They overlooked one of only 3 places in the United States where an armed insurrection overthrew the existing government. They overlooked the only place in the United States where every major European power that intruded into the North American wilderness had governmental authority. They overlooked the place that had the highest rural homicide rates ever recorded in American history. And I could go on with about 57 more points.
And I promise that we will have a program where we let him tell us about that, because I don't know about you, but I'm intrigued. I want to learn more.
Well, I digress a little bit. Let's just say it's all right here. And so as I was reading and I was hearing stories growing up, and I've been living here in Livingston Parish for 27 years now. I've always, except for the time I spent studying in Europe, I've always been a resident of the Florida parishes. And so I grew up hearing all these stories, and I began asking when I was in the library, is there a book about this? And the ladies would nicely say, no, someone should write a book about that. And so I kept reading and reading and reading, and it brought great fortune to me. I got a full scholarship to go to Tulane University, and my family could have never afforded it if I hadn't. Went through there. I became a Fulbright Fellow, which means I was given a lot of money to study in Europe. I became a Rotary Foundation Fellow. I studied at 7 different universities in 4 different countries in Europe before coming back here to Louisiana, back home to LSU to work on the person that became my mentor at LSU, who directed my doctoral work, and I got my doctorate in history. And in the process, I began answering the gaps that I found in books and started writing my own books. And my dissertation was a book called Pistols and Politics, and it told a big story. This is it right down here. They have them so neatly set up and everything. but it came out about 20 years ago and everything, and it sold out immediately, and it went into reproductions again and again and again, and it told a story. Let me just give one little tiny bit.
Please.
For example, a lot of the people watching have undoubtedly heard of the Great Hatfield-McCoy feud.
I'm sure.
Well, in the Hatfield-McCoy feud, 12 people were killed in a 12-year period. During that same 12-year period right here in our area where we're talking about, there were 133 feud-related murders, that many more. And virtually no one was ever successfully prosecuted. So it created a chronic condition of instability in this area. I couldn't find a single book that told that story. So I wrote this one, and it started my career. And then the wheels were turning and everything, and I found that lots of people wanted to talk about Louisiana and the South, but they didn't know anything about it. For example, the man who was known as the greatest authority on Southern history and everything, his name was Charles Francis Adams and everything. He was from Massachusetts and everything, and he was in the 19th century and everything, and he claimed to know everything about the South, and he hated the South. So he made everything about the South sound awful. The people were stupid, they were lazy, they were inbred, hookworm infested, just all these horrible things. And then later in his life, he had to admit, well, he'd never actually been to the South. So I know, Charlotte, it's maddening what happens. So someone like me said, well, that's just not right.
No.
That's not describing my family, that they're all too stupid to put on shoes and that they don't know how to build their houses, they lean to one side, that they don't like to learn, that this, that, and everything, and all these horrible things about that. I said, that's just not my family. So I said, how can that be? How could they have this misconception about the South? And the reason why is because people that lived the South and knew it, people like us, they didn't tell what they knew. They didn't research and write it. So that's what I started doing. Right. After this book, there became another one. And for example, this one we did about the civil rights movement in Louisiana and everything. This picture right here is, some of you may have heard of the famed Civil Rights March that went across Livingston Parish.
Yes.
There it is, right there on the front cover.
Wow.
This one right here is about the Civil War in our area, and it's called, it deals with a bunch of different articles highlighting different aspects of the Civil War. This one right here goes into the way the people in the South lived. It's called Plain Folk of the South. Right?
The people that weren't Scarlett O'Hara.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
the people, the common people, the plain folk we called them, and everything, and how they lived, what they ate, and it's all these different stories. And look, a lot of you would see this and go, that's describing my grandma.
Yes, that's what I was
and
gonna say.
That's exactly what I mean.
Yeah.
But nobody had that. So these books sell like hotcakes. This one right here is called A Fierce and Fractious Frontier, and it talks about our
I love
region.
your alliteration.
Yeah,
At this point.
and actually I can't take credit from that. It came really from the Iberville, the first European to ever lay eyes on our region right here, and he talked about how it's a wonderful, beautiful place and everything, but it's a fierce and fractious frontier. So it came to, and you notice on the picture there, Native Americans,
Yes.
Indians that originally lived here, and we take the whole story farther. This book right here is my most recent one, and it takes the original book and adds to it multiple new chapters that takes the story into the 20th century, into the 1930s, and it follows what's happening. And this one employs something called game theory, which if any of you read the local Livingston paper out here, the Livingston Parish News, McHugh David, the editor there, is a big fan of game theory and everything. And it uses game theory to explain why in Pistols and Politics those very high patterns of violence occurred out here and everything. This one has gotten such acclaim that the Washington Post, the big national newspaper and everything, covered it, as has a story in the BBC, National Public Radio and everything. So what's happening is a lot of people are hearing our story now. This one right here I had to bring too.
Of course.
One of the things, my wife wrote this book, and it's called Schooling in the Antebellum South. Just like we were talking about, people talking about the South that didn't know anything about it forever, up until very recently. Northerners often make fun and look down on the South. And there was a tradition of believing that people in the South did not want to be educated and that they put no money into schools and everything like that. Now, every one of you school kids out there, you know inside a part of you is missing school right now. You parents know you're missing that they can't be there.
We really are.
And all of us, are glad that we're both doctoral students, that we both understand how far it can take us and everything. She said, that's just not true. The South is not like that. So she wrote this whole big award-winning book now, which turns it on its ear, saying you people in Boston, Massachusetts, and New York saying that's the way Southerners are, that's not true. People in the South wanted education. They were educated differently, it's true, than the New England model, but it turned the whole discussion on its ear by her writing this book. One more area that y'all may be familiar, I had to bring this little one right here. So many of your viewers now have been down the Manchac Swamp, right?
Sure.
Okay, the Manchac Swamp.
Oh, man.
And it is one of the most threatened, but one of the most unique environments we find anywhere in the United States. And it used to be a vast cypress forest with trees the size of the great redwood trees in Northern California and everything.
Yeah, because you could drive a car through.
Drive a car through them, yeah. Many of them dating back to the time of Christ and everything. And after the Civil War, Northern companies came in and clear cut them.
Oh, no.
And thus the swamp is being absolutely destroyed by saltwater intrusion and everything. And so this book, again, we go back to Iberville, the first European person to ever see our area right here, and we use what he said. He said, this is one of the prettiest spots I have ever seen. And now, by us not reading books, studying our region, learning about our history and our culture, these groups that didn't care about us were able to come in here, cut down all the trees, do no reforestation, and today it looks like a nuclear bomb went off over it. So this kind of tells the story of that. Finally, we also do textbooks. I've written textbooks. For example, this one right here, American History textbook, readings to supplement your textbook. Here's another one that I did with one of my colleagues and everything. And we simply put together readings that we thought people would enjoy to support. You know how a textbook can kind of be dry sometimes and everything? These kind of tell the human side and liven it up.
And that's history is about people.
It is.
Should be interesting.
It's the forgotten stories. Same with this one right here, okay? This is about Louisiana, though. We never had a really good Louisiana history reader about just general readings from the start of Louisiana history, dating all the way back to the Native Americans. Of course, they didn't leave written records themselves, but the first Europeans who made contact did leave records about them all the way up to the present and everything. And so this one has been a very popular book in schools as well.
That's wonderful.
Not to bore, but basically my point is here that by getting excited about books, I, in my personal experience, was able to go from finding out things to noticing that there were things that had not been answered to saying, we need to answer these questions, and I began to actually write books. And it's done very well for me. I hold Southeastern's endowed chair, which means I'm expected to write books, and we do film work. In fact, I'll be doing a film shoot with the History Channel later this month, or next month rather.
Really?
And do them all the time, and with the Discovery Channel and the Travel Channel and everything, because as people are beginning to find out, wow, y'all have a really interesting history down there that coming from everything from Eugene Bunch's buried gold to the Honey Island swamp monster and everything. They want to come here.
And that's real. So.
Well, actually, we have a little local television show we call the Florida Parish Chronicles, and one of our episodes highlights haunted history, and it talks about ghost stories and legends here and everything, and it all comes from these books right here, including the story of the Honey Island swamp monster.
Okay, don't worry, I'm not letting him leave the building until I've got him booked to do an episode where he talks about some of these things.
So basically for me, I began, just as a child, reading, asking questions, and now trying to answer some of them.
That's wonderful. So you've gone full circle.
Yeah. And books, the power of them, let me just give you an example. there is more information on one page of a printed newspaper than there is an entire half-hour newscast on television.
True.
There is no comparison to what you get in books. Most of you realize that have read a book and then seen the movie, okay, there's no comparison. The book has so much more detail, tells the story so much better. Now, does that mean you got to sit there and read a book? It does. But what I recommend is focus on subjects that you love and start looking, like if you're into the Civil War, if you're into Native Americans, if you're into women's studies, witchcraft, into religious studies, things like that. I had, everybody has all these different types of things, ghost stories, whatever it may be. Go to that section of the library. The library ladies would love to help you. A lot of times they come in and I say, I'm glad I'm here, because they look like they're eager to help somebody,
Yes.
and they will send you right to the correct section where they are and say, start looking here. And as you start pulling them off the shelf, you'll see that there are hundreds and hundreds of books on subjects that you will love. Pick one or two out and you'll find it's like catching a fish. It gets a hook in you.
It does.
And it just reels you in, and you want to do it more and more. And for some of you, you may find, as I read that book, I wish it had mentioned this. Let me see if I can find a book about this. And then when you see, I can't find a book about this, you may get motivated to write your own.
Is there any special book that you can think of, maybe from your early years reading, or a book that when you were in school yourself that set you on your path? Because I'm just fascinated at how you took that interest in history and wound up with all of these books. It's fabulous.
There would be so many that I would be hard pressed to put my finger on just one, but one that I could think of quickly is John Winter's The Civil War in Louisiana. Because I grew up loving Civil War history and everything, and and when I was like, well, what, that's great, because we'd go to battlefields in Virginia
Yes.
and Georgia, and I had a great uncle who was killed at Vicksburg during the siege
Yep.
up there and everything. And so we would go to these places, and my family had a tradition of laying a yellow rose in the spot where the 27th Louisiana Infantry Regiment held the line, and they were in some of the most intense fighting of the whole
Yes.
campaign. So I grew up with that, and then I was like, well, what happened in the war in Louisiana? And I found John Winter's The Civil War in Louisiana, and it was a comprehensive study of that, and it just put that hook in me,
Oh,
and I
wow.
had to know more on that. I've just recently, for those of you that like World War II history, I know those, read a book called The Forgotten Soldier, and it's about a German soldier who came from the Alsace-Lorraine region.
Yes.
So he was actually French, but after World War I, the Germans had seized that
Annexed it,
territory,
right.
so he was forced to serve in the German army on the Eastern Front.
Oh, no.
And the deprivations and the hardships and everything. Even my mother, my father was a World War II veteran, was decorated twice, severely wounded just outside of Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge and everything. But even my mother had to say, I had no idea the Germans had it like that on the Eastern
Oh,
Front.
yes.
So I always try to look for things that I don't know anything about. And just like we were talking a while ago, if we don't learn about these subjects, research them and write them ourselves, it'll be left to people who are ignorant about the South and who we are to tell our story. And that's just not fair. And that's why we are motivated to encourage people to read.
Well, thank you so much. I've just learned an amazing amount, and I'm going to check out some of these books. And I am not letting him leave until I've arranged that follow-up visit. But we really, really appreciate you coming here today.
I'm delighted to be here.
And talking about books.
Reading and talking about books is one of my favorite things in life to do. That and a little fishing during this coronavirus.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining us for today's episode of Talking About Books. Stay tuned for additional episodes. Goodbye.